Welcome into another edition of Inside Carolina's Game Plan podcast. Jason Staples rolls up as the curtain is dropping. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Boys, it is the penultimate Game Plan podcast. Big word, bingo, big word of the day. We're here to talk about North Carolina State, North Carolina. Greg, I'm going to come to you first. Jason, I don't know if you've read Greg's article. I read it just now, but Greg, you sort of nailed it about why this game's important on Saturday.
Yeah, Tommy, and it really is kind of a matter of what the fan base and the administration is expecting in terms of program success. We all know that trajectories on has been a good one under Mack Brown. Won 9 games last year, sitting at 8-3 this year. They've had some really good quarterbacks in Sam Howell and Drake Maye the last 5 years. Um, and I really think this is important for the program to have success on Saturday and to have success in the postseason to at least get to 9 wins to match last year and possibly get to 10 to say, okay, yeah, we went from Hal and had a bad year his last year, won 9 games, got out to a 9-1 start with Drake his first year, which is fantastic, cratered at the end. And then we're seeing something a little bit similar this year. Uh, we've talked before, but if you go back to 21, Carolina lost 4 of the last 5 FBS games to close the year. Lost their last 4 last year, and now they're looking at having lost 3 of the last 4 going into an NC State game where the Wolfpack had kind of found themselves. That's not the trend you want in back-to-back-to-back years. You don't want that type of negative energy going into the offseason yet again. And so I think just for a variety of different reasons, this is an incredibly important game for North Carolina. If you can escape Raleigh on Saturday night with a victory, I think a lot of the fan base will kind of have a collective sigh of relief and will feel a little bit better about themselves, knowing that, hey, 9-3, really good year with the chance of getting to 10 wins with the bowl game. But if you lose this game and you drop to 8-4 after starting out 6-0 and top 10 in the country, it's going to be, wait a minute, for the third year in a row, here we are having really collapsed. What is going on? And there's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of dialogue, and a lot of blaming and pointing fingers as we get into January and beyond.
Jason, get you in on that discussion here before we break down North Carolina State, North Carolina. I guess the simple question is, what is going on? I mean, to Greg's point, if you look, 3 straight years of this sort of, Greg called it cratering out. Just the bottom fell out, has fallen out. Still has an opportunity, 2 games left in this season to correct that now. Um, is there any rational explanation for what's happening with North Carolina to end these seasons? Muted.
Rational. Oh, I was unmuting before you said it. Just for the record here. Rational? Well, that's a different thing. Rational, I'm not sure, but I do think there's a few things that are in play here. Number one is real simple. I mean, I think some of it is just a matter of strength of schedule and when the tough games are, and when rivalry games or tougher games are. I mean, that's some of it. That's not all of it. But I mean, Greg has gone on record multiple times this season about talking about how early in the year, coming into the season, the thought was from a lot of people that the opening of South Carolina neutral, App State, Minnesota, and at Pittsburgh was going to be a pretty tough stretch. And it turns out that was maybe the weakest stretch of anything so far this season, that those 4 teams just aren't any good. So
Muted yourself. I get to say it. I didn't do it. My hands are right here.
I don't know what happened there. That's strange. Anyhow, the the trick here is, you look at Syracuse and Miami. I mean, Syracuse wasn't any good. So the first 5 games, South Carolina, App State, Minnesota, at Pittsburgh, and Syracuse, those were bad football teams for the most part, right? Minnesota's okay, but the others are just not really good football teams. I mean, App State's okay, but they're for a group of 5, but not at this level. Those are 5 games you're supposed to win. And then you get another win over an FCS program in Miami of Florida, which, they're one of the best FCS programs and definitely a quality win there. But then you've got Virginia. Well, okay, they're not any good, but you lose there. Then at Georgia Tech, not real good, and you lose there. Then finally, you're getting to a tough stretch. Duke, at Clemson, and at North Carolina State. That's the 3 toughest games on the schedule, and they're all in the back half. So, that's part of it. You go back to 2022. Opening, FAM, at App State, at Georgia State. Closing, lost Georgia Tech. That's a bad Georgia Tech team. But then NC State, Clemson, and Oregon. Well, I mean, those are better teams than you played the rest of the year. 2021. No ranked teams through the first, let's see, 1, 2. So at Virginia Tech, that was a bad Va Tech team that beat you. Then Georgia State, a bad Virginia team. Georgia Tech, loss, of course. A very bad Duke team. A Florida State team that had no business beating you. Then FCS Miami of Florida. And then you finish the season with a loss to number 8 Notre Dame, win over 15 Wake Forest, loss at 13 Pittsburgh, at 20 North Carolina State, and then South Carolina. So some of it is just that the schedules have been really backloaded. And so the team has sort of feasted on some of the weaker teams on the schedule and early season stuff. And then when they've played better teams in the back half, they haven't been very good. And I think that pairs with not doing a very good job of building depth and getting guys rest early in the season so that when you are playing the better teams in the back half, you're prepared for that and you have the depth to handle it and you're not so banged up and not so exhausted. And I think those two things go together. And, that's probably 80% of it right there.
Greg, when you look at it, you mentioned it in your opening. You said an NC State team that's finding themselves. And Clemson did the same thing ahead of North Carolina. I think Clemson had won, 3 straight ahead of North Carolina. State's won 4 straight. And then you listen to what Jason said, and we talked about it last time, the snap counts. I mean, the snap counts are unbelievable. And sort of asked the players on Tuesday, do you have to do anything different this point of the season to get your body ready to play with all the snaps you've carried? Is it a structural issue within the program that this is happening? Or is it simply, as Jason said, it's just tougher games and they're not as good as, they're an 8-win team, like we always say. Ultimately, they're an 8-win team. I mean, what's your take on the why part?
Well, I don't think Virginia and Georgia Tech were games that North Carolina should have lost. I think we all had Clemson penciled in as a loss last week. So no doubt, Georgia Tech is playing better, and we know Carolina's history down in Atlanta. And Clemson did play. They have played better the last couple of weeks. The State's kind of doing the same thing. I think that plays a role. But I think what we've seen is a trend, though, of North Carolina looking better early in the year and kind of struggling late the last couple of years. And I really think this year is a good example. I mean, when you look at snap counts in the ACC, Carolina's defense has 5 of the top 7 players in snap counts. That's significant.
That's Gray, Eccles, Huzzy,
Rucker,
and Marcus Allen.
Marcus Allen, correct.
That's correct.
Allen's maybe number 2. And I think State's first guy on that list, I believe is 12th, one of the linebackers, not Wilson, no, one of the other guys, just for comparison purposes. And then you look at Corey Gaynor and Spencer Rowland are 1 and 2 in the ACC for offensive linemen. Now, the question is, especially defensively. Does that speak to a depth issue where they haven't developed guys? Is it a matter of Gene just wanting to go with the guys that he's comfortable with? I'm not exactly sure what the answer to that is, Tommy. Hopefully, it's just a matter of Gene going with the guys he wants to go with, and that it's not a deeper issue of not having the depth that they need, not having the development occurring that should be taking place, because some of those guys that we just mentioned are going to be gone next year. And so I think that's a good question. We just don't know enough information about, but it seems to have played a role. But it remains to be seen. I think in terms of the fatigue conversation, though, and Jason can speak more to this with his love of the Florida Gators, but in a rivalry game to this extent, 8 o'clock, two teams that are 8-3, if you're talking about fatigue after this game, I think you kind of missed the point.
Yeah. Now, don't you put that evil on me, Greg Barnes. Don't you put that evil on me.
This could be a great one on Thanksgiving Eve. Jason, I mean, it's a rivalry game. Nothing else matters, right? I did find it interesting. I'll back up. I asked Chiswick about not playing Amari Campbell specifically, and he said it's on him. We got to do better. I mean, they're in week 11 at the time, now week 12. I mean, it's a little late for that. But talking about the rivalry itself, let's get into that portion of it. Mack is the statesman, right? He's not going to say anything overly negative in front of the TV cameras, in front of the press. What he says behind the scenes may be significantly different. But he talked about rivals, and he talked about wanting to see guys play well and all that. State's always taken a different approach. You've seen sort of a shift in the fan base from North Carolina fans. And I think maybe it's just a sign of the times, and it's not a bad thing. Going from staying above the fray to now wanting to fight fire with NC State over the last few years. Greg, how big a deal, not Greg, Jason, and I'll come back to you, Greg, but Jason, how big a deal is it, the rivalry to the players? Like, how bad, they all said the right things on Tuesday. We don't like NC State, they don't like us, blah, 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 but how big is that really in your head as a player, and when you've been on these teams, just not liking who you're about to play? And how does that affect things? Is that even a thing that affects the game itself?
Oh, it's a thing. Yeah, it's a thing. But it's different from how it is with fans. So with fans, there's like it's an institutional thing more than anything else. It's like a tribal thing. With players, a large portion of it in rivalry games is that these are guys who you grew, like, rivalries are generally regional, schools that are close by that recruit the same territories and recruit a lot of the same kids. And then those guys go on and become players at those different schools, and some of them go to one and some of them go to the other. And these are guys you grew up playing against. They're guys that may have been on your team at different points. You were in all-star games with these guys. You know these guys. And you won't hear the end of it if they beat you. Right? You have to live with that this guy's also from your town, and now he's got bragging rights over you, not just now, but forever. Right? That's a big deal, right? I mean, it's one thing to lose a fight. It's another thing to lose a fight to your brother. Right? Yep. That's the thing. And it's not that you necessarily hate your brother more than you do other people. In some ways, it's actually the opposite. And in a lot of rivalries, there's a whole lot of respect going between one sideline and another. But you've played against these guys before. And, in some cases, you chose to go to different schools. Sometimes maybe you didn't like that guy that was going to the other school. So you guys ended up on different teams. Or, each program has its own sort of brand, the kind of player that it prefers and the kind of player that prefers it. And so, yeah, what happens is you get on that campus, you embrace that identity. You embrace that we're this and we're not that. And over time, it becomes more and more us versus them. and you identify with that, and you want to make sure that when you go back home over the years, that you got to win over that. And the other thing too is it's not just the other players, it's that, let's say you're from Charlotte, or let's say you're from, North Raleigh, and you're recruited by both North Carolina and North Carolina State. There's a bunch of fans of both programs where you grew up. And regardless of where you go, some of them are going to be disappointed. And then if you go and you win, well, at least you got bragging rights over all those people in your town, not just whoever else went to the other school, from your football playing days, but everybody else, you got bragging rights over. You can kind of shut them up, like, oh, we beat them my year, or my years. If you don't, being from that hometown's less fun the rest of your life. These guys know that, right? This is something that's bigger than just which team you play for. This is like a tribal thing that follows you the rest of your life if you live in the same region.
Greg, from your standpoint, having covered these games a lot, how big is one team planting their flag or attempting to plant their flag on your field? Every Carolina player mentioned that on Tuesday. State, of course, State, of course, tried to plant a flag in artificial turf. That's questionable, but you get the point.
Agriculture.
How big a deal is that? Yeah, I was going to say agricultural schools. Yeah,
Right.
You see what it reminds me of? You see what this is? This sand. You know what it's going to be in 100 years? It's going to be sand.
Yeah, look, when you're talking about rivalry games, and really any game in general, but you're trying to find whatever motivation you can. Michael Jordan found the littlest comment from an opponent and focused on that to give him a little bit more of an edge. Larry Fedora, who was very much in the NFL mindset, the Butch Davis mindset of, just another opponent. Behind the scenes, the one year went in and had his staff just completely decorate the North Carolina locker room with NC State gear, just to get everybody riled up. So everybody's trying to find an edge. And so I don't think there's any doubt that the North Carolina coaching staff is using that incident last year to say, look, guys, they disrespected you after they beat you on your home field. Are you okay with that? If you are, then we don't want you playing. That should piss you off. And that's really what it's about. And it's every little bit of motivation that you can find. And there's going to be a lot of emotion Saturday night anyway. So it's being able to harness that emotion and not cost yourself with some stupid penalties. Who was it that punched somebody that had a helmet on a couple years ago? And then we had the whole fight after the game where Larry Fedora was like, I didn't see anything. I don't know what you're talking about. So you've got to be able to harness it and control it, but it's got to be bubbling up under the surface to really give yourself somewhat of an edge.
Mack told the story about Ted Kane and Donnie Thompson. Everybody that's a Carolina State fan has seen that.
That's a perfect tackle too. It was excellent.
I know that was. I asked Mack. I said, Mack, now let's be honest. Did you really watch it and say, my guy? But it gets fired up. I mean, I remember several years ago. It's been a while, probably back in the '90s. Carolina was down 14-0 at half. Maybe they had a fight on the sidelines, and Carolina ended up beating them in Raleigh bad and all. I'm all for there will be blood in rivalry games, but some people approach it differently. It's no secret that John Bunning disliked North Carolina State. He had success against them on the field. So I think to a certain extent you take we always say you take the appearance or the mood of your coach, and Carolina did that in the Bunning years.
Roy Williams is the greatest example of them all. He didn't like how he was treated when he was a student. And, I mean, look at his record against NC State.
He spent his life paying them back.
And, I remember Hansbrough and those guys, when they had that first loss, they're like, oh, so this is what a rivalry game means to our head coach. We never want to lose a game in that rivalry again. Um, so, and I've told the story too, Tommy, not to get off on a tangent, but I've told the story here is 22 years ago this year that my brother, who was a NC State diehard, invited me to the 0-1 game. And Carolina won that game, and I was a little boisterous sitting in the Wolfpack Club section. And my brother and I, speaking to Jason's earlier point about sibling rivalries, got into some fisticuffs in the parking lot, and my brother's wife left us and drove back to Gastonia, which is about a 3-hour drive. And we had to find a ride to Charlotte after that. So it's not just on the football field where the blood starts pumping.
It is it's interesting. Yeah, the only time I've been to Raleigh plenty, and I'll be there on Saturday. The only time I've ever been cussed, it was by an old lady, and she cussed me so bad. I was dressed similar to the way I am now. I don't know. I didn't say anything. I think I was just walking up the aisle, and I got the cussing of my life. Bless her. I thought it was hilarious. Jason, before we take a break and talk about the actual game, the importance for the North Carolina program from your standpoint of winning this game, beyond the rivalry, beyond everything, but the importance.
This is a must-win, Tommy.
You said it.
There it is. There it is. I'm planting the flag.
It's a must-win. I mean,
it's Biblingo, whatever your shirt says.
A huge part. Biblingo, yeah, it's a software for learning Hebrew and Greek. It's actually awesome. For those of you homeschooling out there, it's a great program. Or if you just want to pick up those things, it's from 0 up. Or if you're just reviewing, it's really good. Having my my 4-year-old already starting to do that. Anyway,
I'm concentrating on English still.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I think this is a must-win. I mean, really, as close as you're going to get. And the reason is that a big part of Mack 2.0 has been about building. Right, has been about reestablishing dominance in the state, and being the flagship of the state. And so much of the recruiting pitch is about that. And you lose to NC State, and you lose to NC State 3 years in a row when you're supposed to be building, and that starts to ring hollow. It's like, yeah, you guys look real good early in the year, but when it comes time to go, play those guys, they come in and kick your butt. That's hard to take on the road. And, Greg, your column, the end of it, it's like, you don't want to go into the recruiting season, into the off season when these guys are making their final decisions with that level of momentum. And it's not just this year's guys, it's next year's guys who are already starting to make decisions and take visits and all of that. And you really want, like, for the 2024 class, that's one thing, but for the 2025 class, who's going to be making decisions in the spring and the summer of next year, a lot of those, for that momentum to be, oh yeah, NC State's held firm, and if we want to go where, play more physical football and, punch them in the mouth and, take those soft, Tar Heels down every year, then we want to go and wear red. Well, yeah, that's the stuff that happens when you start losing that game year in, year out. If you want to keep building, if you want the program to continue to, if you want 8 wins to be your ceiling, you lose this game. If you want to start bringing 10 wins and 11 wins into play, you got to win this kind of game. And especially when you got a guy like Drake Maye out there. You can't just you can't have Sam Howell and Drake Maye go 0 for 3 in their final 3 years in the program against your rival. You just can't do that. And I mean, it eventually starts to stink on the recruiting trail, and it starts to bite your program. So it's a must win.
Let's talk about Johnny T-shirt. JohnnyT-shirt.com is a must visit. A must visit spot during the holidays. It is Thanksgiving tomorrow, but the Christmas season is here. Black Friday is 2 days from now. Plenty of chances to get gear on discount. Plenty of chances to go to Johnny T-shirt on Franklin Street, JohnnyT-shirt.com. Shop them. Get all the basketball jerseys, football, NIL stuff, everything you need. Christmas ornaments. Hey, we got a few on the Christmas tree in there, I'm sure, from Johnny T-shirt. Check them out. If you're a Inside Carolina Premium subscriber, you get that 10% off. So if they're having a sale, you can use your Inside Carolina discount as well. JohnnyT-shirt.com, Johnny T-shirt on East Franklin Street, and Inside Carolina Premium subscribers love it and love the discount. Be right back with the national guys. It's the game plan, North Carolina State week. Okay, boys, it is about 9:26 on the East Coast. Greg, I'm going to come to you. You're a stats guy, big stats guy, and you've led this show many a time talking about the opposing quarterback and their numbers. Brennan Armstrong 2 years ago came into Chapel Hill and threw for about 765 yards and looked really good doing it. Decides to transfer to NC State to follow Robert Maye and was not good to start the season for NC State. MJ Morris takes over, wins a couple games, and decides he doesn't want to do it anymore for NC State in red shirts. And now Brennan Armstrong has been reborn as a different type quarterback. What have you seen from him numbers-wise that should alarm folks if North Carolina is to stop this guy?
So Brennan Armstrong is firmly planted in the North Carolina record book for the game you referenced, with 554 passing yards against Jay Bateman's defense. If you look at what he's done this year, the most he's thrown for in a game is 264 against VMI. So I don't know if it had to have been an injury situation. I know he got hurt. There has to have been some big change because he's a different quarterback now. To answer your question, what is concerning? Well, he did struggle to start the year, trying to figure out kind of where he fit in a nice system. Doesn't really have playmakers at wide receiver. Kevin Concepcion's really emerged as a really good talent as a freshman, but he wasn't that really early on. And then they didn't have much of a running game. So the offense was just kind of a mess early. MJ Morris comes in, the defense starts playing better, and then Morris decides he's going to redshirt. So Armstrong comes back in. Well, in the 2 games since he's come back in, it's like he understands he had a second chance here in his final year as a college football player. And it's really just been phenomenal. Granted, it's Wake Forest and Virginia Tech, but Wake Forest defense ranks 55th in the FEI. Carolina's 70th. Virginia Tech's 83rd. So it's not that big of a gap between those defenses. But against those 2 teams, Wake Forest and Virginia Tech, both of which were on the road, he completed 69.8% of his passes for 316 yards, 3 touchdowns without interception. And then running the ball, he ran it 36 times in those 2 games for 5.1 yards per carry and 3 touchdowns. So that's about right at 500 yards of total offense, completing about 70% of his passes, 5.1 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns without a turnover. That's pretty good. When you pair that with Gibson's defense, that's enough. And so I think that's the concerning thing is the defense, the NC State team as a whole has really found itself. Dave Doran's done a really good job. And not to get too far off the point of your question, Tommy, but I want to share this because I think this is important. When you look at Brian Fremo's information, he's got just a wealth of data available, but he ranks every single game on a per possession basis. That's kind of what he does, but he does the entire game for each of these teams. And it shows you where you stack up nationally every single time you go out. When you look at some of State's early games in the year, like Connecticut, that game, their performance was in the 35th percentile nationwide of games. That is not good. They won, but that was not good. Against Duke, when they lost 24-3, 28th percentile. That's really poor. After that Duke game, though, to start this 4-game winning streak, NC State, 81st percentile against Clemson, 89th percentile against Miami, 82nd percentile against Wake, and then 69th percentile against Virginia Tech. And they were up 35-14 in that game. I have to imagine some of those last 2 scores by Virginia Tech kind of lowered that threshold. So NC State, as opposed to Carolina, has really just come alive. When you factor in what Brennan Armstrong has done since NJ Morris kind of stepped out of the picture, the offense has some identity now, and this team is playing as well as it's played, I think, in a couple years, which makes it an incredibly difficult task for the Tar Heels on Saturday night.
So, Jason, North Carolina's defense, obviously running quarterbacks have been an issue for every team, but North Carolina, Syracuse tried to do it, and they roughed up Syracuse. What does NC State do any differently than Carolina hadn't already seen this year? How can Carolina deal with what that state offense will bring, as Greg's talked about?
I don't think they do anything that you haven't really seen all year. They just do certain things pretty well. I mean, they're physical up front, and they're coherent with what they do offensively and defensively. I do think defensively they do a lot that can cause problems for you. That 3-3-5 stack is it can be a pain to work against because it's different from a lot of what you see. And I think actually Drake Maye has had more trouble. I mean, the numbers that I put together in the preseason showed that he had more trouble in general against odd front defenses that would screw around with some stuff post snap, and that's what NC State does. And they find a way to kind of change the picture on him after the snap and bring rushers from places where it doesn't initially feel like they're coming from. And he's really intuitive and doesn't always feel the pressure right in those cases. And so I think that's one thing that they do, but that's flipping over to the other side of the ball a little more. But I think offensively, they do a lot of the same sorts of things that some of the teams that you've already played do. I mean, they're similar to Miami, similar to in some respects to what Minnesota and App did. There's a lot of things that they do that you've seen. They just are just now starting to do some of it well, and especially in the running game.
So Kevin Concepcion, or Casey Concepcion, has been a big part of it. Brennan Armstrong has been just another running back at times for them. Given North Carolina's issues up front, give me some key players on that defense. Elijah Huzzy got hurt against Clemson, did not look good. It looked like maybe a high ankle, so not sure if he's playing or not. They certainly would need him. But, Jason, who needs to step up for this North Carolina defense? Is it the same people every week?
Pretty much. Got to get the defensive tackles to step up first and foremost. That's the main answer right there.
So Murphy, Fox. I think Fox went down a little bit against Clemson. Hester. I mean, what can Gene Chizik do to scheme up something differently at this point in the season against NC State, if there's anything?
I mean, it's not scheme at this point. I mean, they schemed pretty well against Clemson. It's not scheme. They schemed well against Georgia Tech. They schemed well against Duke, and in many cases, they just got beat. It's about the physicality. It's about coming downhill and making tackles. It's about playing low and playing with power. It's about doing your job.
You keeping it simple this week. I like it. I don't even.
It's a rivalry game. It comes down to the simple stuff. If you do your job with good fundamentals and you do what you've been working on the whole season, or what you should have been working on the whole season, if you do that with great intensity and effort, you're going to be pretty likely to win that game. Simple. Rivalry games are when you get simple. You maybe toss a couple wrinkles in to break tendencies, but you win these games by being sound.
Yeah, and Tommy, you mentioned the Syracuse game. What Carolina did really well in that game against Schrader is they were able to key on him and limited what he could do. And once they were successful in that regard, Syracuse had to kind of switch to their secondary game plan. And Syracuse wasn't good enough to have a secondary game plan. And I think State's kind of the same way. You know what they're going to do, to Jason's point going in. Brennan Armstrong's going to run the ball. He's going to try to throw it to Concepcion. They're going to give Concepcion some options, whether it be jet sweeps or whatever it may be. But if you can limit Brennan Armstrong, especially running the ball, and you make him beat you with his arm, you're going to have a pretty good shot. I mean, if you look at kind of what he's done, he's broke 21 tackles. He's averaging 3.8 yards after contact on runs. On quarterback scrambles, he's averaging 6.7 yards per attempt. Don't let him do that. I mean, look, it's somewhat of a simple thing. You know what they're going to try to do. And State's not flashy. State's not trying to hit you for big explosive plays. They want to play the field position game. They have a really good special teams, better than Carolina's. I mean, this is built like a kind of a classic NFL team in terms of a really good defense, really good special teams. They want to play field position with you. And they're going to try to dink and dunk and get some points like that offensively. That's what they're going to try to do to beat you. And Carolina has to be good enough to limit the mistakes, get off the field when they have the occasional third down. They did a pretty good job at Clemson. They had, like 5 or 6 3-and-outs that they forced. You got to do that. You've got to be pretty good in the red zone. State's not flashy offensively. They want to be gritty and tough and all those things. And to Jason's point, you gotta just step up and do your job and prevent them from doing that.
Steve Williams' comment: "It's a culture versus culture. Toughness will prevail." Could have ended the podcast a lot earlier on that, Steve. If you'd put that up there earlier, I'd have just mic dropped and left that on the screen. Jason, you mentioned State's defense against Drake Maye. Why is that giving Drake trouble? Why is that type approach on defense, giving him trouble, you think?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is that the picture changes after the snap a lot with those 3-3-5 type looks. You have a lot of coverage flexibility, and because you've got the ability to be in quarters and all of a sudden rotate to a 3 high or 1 high type look. They'll go both middle of the field open, middle of the field closed. They'll rotate between them, and you don't know necessarily where the pressure is going to come from. So you've got your 3 down; those guys are usually coming, but where the 4th guy is coming from isn't always clear. They'll bring 6 at one point. They'll bring 3 another time, and so some of that flexibility, it just means that you have to really understand the structure of what you're looking at more, and you have to really pay attention to what the coverage is doing after the snap. So it slows you down a beat. And then the other thing is they do a lot of movement up front. So they'll slant and stunt and do a lot of these things. And one of the things that has been a weakness for Drake Maye is if he doesn't like what he's seeing and he feels a little bit of pressure from one place or another and feels that there's space, let's say you get a little bit of a stunt or a slant where it's slanting to the right of the offense. Drake will slide. He's got really good natural feel there. He'll slide to the left, and then if he doesn't like what he sees on that first or second read, oftentimes first read, his instinct as a really good athlete will often be, I can tuck and go. But against these kinds of 3-3-5s, a lot of times you'll have a guy bending around 2 gaps or something that happens to be coming right into that space right as he's stepping into it. And if he's not careful to get rid of it on the clock, there's going to be somebody that's coming free late for pressure, and that's causing discomfort or pressure right as he's trying to make a play. And there's also a lot of speed on the field. It's a little bit smaller overall group than what you have with like a standard even front team. They normally have really active linebackers, and then they've got that additional sort of safety type or nickel type that's out there, and it's a pretty flexible and fast group that they're constantly trying to create pressure from different spots that's going to find ways of coming free without committing more than 4, sometimes 5 to the rush. And sometimes they'll show 6 and then they'll not bring 6, they'll bring 3, they'll bring 4, sometimes they'll bring 5, and you're just not sure which one it is. And then every so often they'll surprise you and bring that 6th. All of that goes to make it a little tougher on the quarterback. And then you combine that with, it's a pretty tough group. They do hit, they take a lot of pride of that, about that in their program. And, he's taken some real shots in this game the last couple of years, and that does also wear on you. So it's a bit of a combination, but that's what they do.
Yeah, and Tommy, to give some numbers to that, I think it's worthwhile looking at last year's game, especially in light of it being in Chapel Hill. Gibson's defense, we knew last year was elite. It was top 10 in the country. And I think a lot of people saw kind of what they were losing and said, there's no way they can be as good. Well, they're not quite as good. They're 17th in F+, which combines FEI and SP+. It's really good. Not quite Clemson level, but it's up there. But if we look at what happened last year, number one, Jason mentioned it there, Drake has had success when he's had to tuck and run and scramble and make something out of nothing. That didn't happen last year. He had 42 yards, non-sack yards running the ball. So State did a really good job kind of keeping eyes on him and not letting him beat them with his feet. I think he averaged 3.5 yards per carry. Now let's look at what they were able to do to fluster him some. When Drake was kept clean, he was pretty good. Completed 74% of his passes, 218 yards, only 6.2 yards per attempt. And part of that's because he did not complete a deep pass, which is something to watch out for. But under pressure, which was on 37% of his dropbacks, so more than a third of his dropbacks, Drake was 3 of 14 passing on 21 dropbacks for 15 yards. That's 1.1 yards per attempt.
And that was against State last year
That was
folks. Make sure they understand what you're saying.
correct. That was against State last year at Kenan Stadium. That just kind of speaks to the issues that Gibson's defense can provide. They were able to get to Drake. They were able to put pressure on him. He was pressured 21 times in that game last year. And
that's a lot. That is an awful lot.
And as Jason just explained, the 3-3-5 that Gibson runs is you can bring pressure from different places. It's kind of hard to kind of get a bearing. They do the traditional 0-4-I look where the defensive tackle's will be coming right at Corey Gaynor. And so it's tough. And I think the fact that they were able to limit Drake Maye, I mean, when we look at yardage, Carolina only had 351 yards total in that game, 3.9 yards per play, which for a Phil Longo offense is incredibly low. Maybe not this year at Wisconsin, but in this time at North Carolina, that is incredibly low. And that just kind of speaks to the challenge that Chip Lindsey is going to have to work with this week. And I'm fascinated to see what little wrinkles, what little adjustments are going to be made. And also, let's not forget, you got Omarion Hampton, who is tied for the national lead in rushing yards. If he gets going, all of a sudden that pressure changes on Drake Maye, and this offense can have some success.
Jason, so what's difference? Why didn't NC State do the exact same thing they did last year, and is Omarion Hampton the reason that they're not going to be able to?
Well,
or
they're going to
sure
try to do.
Yeah.
They're going to try to do the same thing they did last year.
How does Hampton change that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is they're giving up 3.54 yards per rush. That's pretty stingy. Now they gave up 7.75 against Virginia Tech last week. That's interesting. But that was only on 18 carries, by the way. Virginia Tech didn't have the ball a lot last week. But yeah, I mean, you look at Miami's a pretty good rushing offense. I mean, we talked about this going into the Clemson game last week. Miami ran against that Clemson offense and averaged 5 yards a carry. And, it was one of those things I was saying, well, they did that and Notre Dame did that. Carolina should be able to do similar, and they sure did. They averaged well over that. Well, Miami against NC State averaged 3.72 yards per carry, which is pretty good for NC State. Clemson averaged 3.37 yards per carry against NC State. Duke managed to average 6.47 and beat the brains out of NC State in that game. But they limited Louisville to 0.69 yards per carry. I mean, this is a stingy run defense, when they want to focus on stopping the run, they're pretty good at it. And they do it from what look like light boxes initially. That's the other thing about the 3-3-5 is that they'll have guys outside the box that suddenly get inserted into the box and they're coming up with force. They're not waiting on the ball carrier. You know, it looks like it's a 5-man box and all of a sudden it's a 7 or 8-man box right after the snap. They do a lot of that. The question is, and this is where Hampton really becomes the X factor, as you mentioned. If Hampton, one of the things that they do really well is they tackle. This is a good tackling team. You know, you see guys from Miami or Clemson or whatever, those guys getting into the line of scrimmage with a little bit of space, and then they're hit by one of those backers or safeties, and they go down right there. I mean, they don't miss a ton of tackles. Well, Omarion Hampton's been one of the best in the country at breaking tackles this year. So that's the thing, that if he's able to do that, if he's able to continue doing what he's been doing and gaining yards after contact, and I was looking at it earlier today, he's averaging over 4 yards after contact per rush. If he's able to do that, like you guys said, that makes it so that Carolina can stay balanced, and it makes it a lot easier on Drake Maye, because now they're having to actually really bring those guys into the box. And that's one of those things that as those guys start to really trigger against the run, one of the downsides of a 3-3-5 is that you're getting guys coming from greater depth against the run, and they have to come downhill pretty fast. And that's when you can start hitting play action and RPOs and things behind them as they're coming downhill faster from depth. So that opens everything up. If Omarion Hampton is able to gain some space and get the tough yards in this game, that does change a whole lot from State's perspective. They're going to have to show their work a little bit more before the snap. They're going to have to make sure that they're triggering faster and they're not as insulated. One of the things the 3-3-5 likes to do is they want to be able to take away the pass by structure and the run by aggression and, you know, fitting downhill after the snap. If you reverse that and they have to take away the run by structure instead of the pass by structure, now they're potentially vulnerable on the back end for some of this stuff with Tez Walker and the rest.
Jason, let me ask you a question. Let me ask this first, Greg, because I think you probably got a better question. But 4 yards after contact every carry for Omarion Hampton. I can't decide if that is an indictment of the offensive line and they're not as good maybe as they seem, or is Omarion Hampton just ridiculous? I mean, there's a balance there somewhere, right?
It's the latter.
Hampton's the ridiculous one.
Yeah, the offensive line is right around national average in terms of yards before contact. So they're pretty average. But Hampton is toward the top when it comes to yards after contact per rush. He's averaging 4.41 yards after contact per rush.
Which is just ridiculous. He was named a Doak Walker semifinalist. Greg, go ahead. Sorry to jump in.
No, I was just going to add the fact that in the game we probably don't want to talk too much about, but 2 years ago in Raleigh, when Carolina somehow lost, UNC ran for 300 yards at a 7.3 yards per carry clip. So they had plenty of success running the ball, and that's when British had such a big game, and Sam Howell had a big game running the ball until the inexplicable happened with 2 minutes to play.
Yep, that one will go down with 1996 Virginia as an inexplicable play. Yeah, I still can't believe it. But I do remember sitting in the stands after that field goal went through saying, this game is not over, folks. It is not over. Let's go to predictions. And before we go to predictions, I'm going to talk about Congruity, new sponsor, a relatively new sponsor of Inside Carolina. Certainly friends of Inside Carolina premium subscribers. I'll tell you why in just a second. But they are obsessed with customer service. They're obsessed with becoming part of your small business and mid-sized business team. They provide that essential admin support with a single point of contact and all the support you need available to make sure that your business grows. They handle your people, your HR, your payroll, outsourcing. They do it with all sorts of top of the line technology and again that customer service, and they grow you up. So you go from that small mid-sized business to that big business, that national business, just like Congruity has. Local, North Carolina based, national coverage. They'll take care of you. Go to congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Fill out the the little questionnaire, the form. They'll get you connected with a consultant. And they'll give Inside Carolina listeners and watchers and viewers and subscribers and all that a free assessment on your payroll and HR. If they can help you, great. If not, it was free and you lose nothing. But at least check them out. congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Greg Barnes.
I got one thing before we go to truly to predictions. In terms of missed tackles forced among running backs in the country, who've had over 50% of their team's carries, okay? Or over 50% of 256, which Pro Football Focus sets as like a full load basically at this point in the season. So this is running backs who basically split time. This is ruling out backups, like third string, fourth string guys who are just playing garbage time. In terms of top in the country, Omarion Hampton is fifth in the country with 60 missed tackles forced. And that yards per contact per attempt of 4.41 is number one. Leads the nation. Next highest is Kyrie Robinson at 4.2. So, and that's from San Jose State. The next highest in an FBS looks like Bucky Irving from Oregon, who's the next. So yeah, that's saying something. He's really doing a lot of work there.
Should he be at first team All-American?
I think there's a strong case for it. I mean, I don't have a vote for an All-American team anymore. Did a couple years ago, but if I did this year, I'd have Hampton as one of my two selections at tailback.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, I believe semifinalist for the Doak Walker, which is the nation's top running back. Greg, what you think? Is that an All-American running back?
I think so. I mean, when you just look at the guys in line behind him, none of the powerhouse guys are really there. I mean, Jaden Daniels, which is crazy. He's got 1,014 rushing yards. Estime Notre Dame's got 1,100. Obviously, that's pretty good. Cody Schrader, of course, he's had a good year. He's at 1,200. So that's really his competition. Gerard Jordan, Louisville is really good, but he's at 1,000. So I don't think there's really any doubt that Hampton's up there in terms of All-American consideration. If he has a good weekend, this weekend gets over 1,500 yards, I think he'd have a challenge keeping him off, to be honest.
I mean, two guys have over 1,400 yards in the country right now, and that's Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State and Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. And you look at the two resumes, and it's a pretty big difference in terms of yards after contact. I mean, it's a 0.6 yards per carry difference in yards after contact that Omarion is producing. So he's producing much more relative to how quickly he gets hit than the next closest competition. And I mean, it's not close. So, I mean, I think if I were choosing All-Americans for that position, it'd be Omarion, and then it'd be up in the air between between Gordon and maybe Estime among the guys that I've seen. Maybe Devin Neal also would be in that consideration, but I think Estime and Hampton would be my two.
Blake Corum is going to be up there somewhere. They'll do that.
Yeah,
unless people have Michigan bias.
Corum's a good player, but like if you really look at it, he's benefiting from a really, really good offense more than he has been an elite player himself. I mean, he's a really good short yardage guy, but I've got the I'm going to lower it to 20% because he hasn't had quite as many carries, but even with 20% of attempts, he's not on the first page of 50. Let me find him.
Who are you talking about, Corum?
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
at 888 rushing yards, and he's not even at 5 yards per carry rushing, whereas Hampton's at 6.3. So that's actually kind of surprising that he hasn't had a better year statistically than he's had.
Will be interesting to see
I mean,
how that all
Blake
shakes
Corum
out.
is averaging 2.57 yards after contact. That's half. Right? To put that in perspective, he's averaging 4.9 yards per carry, and Hampton is averaging what? Got to look at it again. It's well over 6, I think.
6.3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 6.3. So he's averaging, 2 yards per carry more, basically, or close to 1.7. And then the yards after contact, there's a 2-yard difference there. I mean, I just Corum's a good back, don't get me wrong, but he's not had anywhere near the season relative to his supporting cast and the surroundings that Hampton has had. Hampton's had an All-American season.
Before we go to predictions, the one thing, and if you guys can look this up, Hampton's lost 11 yards all year.
That's amazing.
And one of those was against Clemson early, and it was like, uh-oh, Clemson's going to get them figured out. 11 yards lost in 225 carries. It just seems
that's where you say, look, the offensive line's been pretty good. Because that's not all in the back. That's the back doing a great job of pressing the line of scrimmage and all of that, and not going down if he gets hit in the backfield, sure. But that also means you're not giving up a ton of penetration and guys getting hit in the backfield a bunch. So, yeah, the offensive line's been, I think, maybe a little above average on the season when you weigh out, rushing and passing, pass blocking. But Hampton's been an All-American.
I mean, you would figure you'd fall down a couple times and lose 3 or 4 yards carry at some point. Anyway, I mean, we've certainly seen North Carolina running backs trip and fall in the backfield over the years. Let's get to, well, folks, I hope you enjoyed the Omarion Hampton portion of the program. He has been a key part. He does. He's been a key part of this North Carolina offense. Greg, I'm going to you first with predictions. North Carolina State, 8 o'clock in Carter Finley on Saturday night. What's going to happen?
Well, I'll add one reference point here. I think Jason would say this is meaningless, and I tend to agree with him, but I think it's relevant given we talked about it to start the year of how fans were obsessed. Chip Lindsey is going to be this running guy. It's going to be very unique and completely different. And because of that, it's going to really help the defense, and the offense is going to stay on the field. They're going to eat up time of possession. All these good things are going to happen. As we sit today on November 22nd, North Carolina, time of possession average is 28 minutes, 51 seconds, which is the lowest of the Mack Brown 2.0 era. All 4 of Phil Longo's offenses held the ball longer than Chip Lindsey's has this year, which is a little surprising given Hampton's success running the ball. But, hey, here we are. The reason I bring that up, NC State is second in the ACC at 32. I mentioned earlier, Gibson's defense has been fantastic. Special teams has been really good as well. And really what that offense is going to try to do is not get crazy trying to take deep shots or do anything fancy. They're going to eat up the clock. They're going to play the field position game, and they're going to make North Carolina go the long distance of the field. Why? NC State's allowing 1 point per possession when the opponent has a long field ahead of them. This is a really good defense, and this is a really good team concept that Dave Doran's got in place. And so I think this is going to be a low possession game relatively. It's going to be similar to Clemson, maybe even a little bit slower pace than that. And so I don't think there's going to be many points scored here. I think this is going to be one of those ones where Carolina has got to take advantage when the opportunities present themselves. They got to get some stops. I've been tracking the stat. When Carolina has scored less than 31 points, they've lost 14 of their last 15 games. And that speaks to the defense really struggling to hold up their end of the bargain and playing a defensive game. Look at Washington right now. Washington's offense is fantastic. They've had 2 games where the defense really had to step up and be the primary, not the complementary piece, and that defense has done it. We keep waiting for Gene Chizik to be able to do that with his defense. That may have to happen on Saturday night. I think this is going to be a great game. I think it's going to be a feisty game, a lot of similarities to Clemson. I think you can make the case Carolina probably should have won the Clemson game, if not for a couple of turnovers right there at the goal line from Omarion Hampton. So because of that, and also because I had North Carolina, and I wasn't the only one. I had North Carolina going 9-3 this year with a win at NC State. I'm at 8-3. I'm going with the victory for North Carolina, 27-24 in a barn burner. And this one's not going to overtime. So I have that in there as well, Tommy.
Jason, I see a lot of nodding. Go ahead and tell me, 26-23.
So you checked a lot of the boxes I was already going to check so that I can make it a little shorter. I also think it's interesting that the time of possession, the difference between being elite at that, Clemson number 1 in the conference and, not really good at that is less than 4 minutes. Right. And people treat this like it really matters, but like the difference between being on the field an extra 4 minutes over the course of a game is really minimal. It just doesn't matter very much. What does matter is the number of possessions, and I do think this is going to be a low possession game. I think NC State's going to Dave Doran is going to go out of his way to make sure that they're running clock between snaps. They're going to sort of wait their way to the line of scrimmage. They'll snap the ball with 8 seconds left on the clock, 7 seconds left on the clock, and just try to shorten this game because they don't want to get into a track meet with North Carolina. They want to make this a slugfest. Carolina wants this to be a track meet. So I think it's going to be closer to a slugfest. That's the thing. So to win this game, Carolina's going to kind of have to win a game style-wise that, probably wouldn't be their preference. And I think this is one of those games that very well might go to overtime. I think this is going to be one of those, all-time rivalry games that is going to come down to, last possession type game. I think it's going to be a very competitive game, probably turnovers. If one team is +1 or +2, that team's going to win the game. But when it comes down to it, I've said this for years. I look at the line of scrimmage and the quarterback position first when it comes to looking at games. In this game, I think they're kind of split. I think NC State on the offensive line might be a little better. NC State's defensive line has been, you kind of have to include the whole front there. I think NC State's front has been a little better. But I think Carolina holds a pretty significant edge at quarterback. So you call that a wash. Now I want to know who changed the scoreboard. Which team has the freaks? Which team has the guy that okay, you hand it off to him and there's going to be a play where that guy just does that guy stuff and all of a sudden you got a 58-yard touchdown that was, bottled up at the line of scrimmage and he just broke a tackle. Which team has that guy? We were just talking about him, right? Which team has the guy that's just going to run right by coverage and, just happens to be the play that they brought pressure and you get the one-on-one and that guy runs for a 60-yard score and makes it look easy because he's just fast. So at the end of the day, I think the weapon that Carolina has in terms of being able to change the scoreboard with big plays ends up being the difference in this game. I think it's going to be a really close game. It may well be like last year where it depends on Drake Maye, the ball in his hands, 70 yards to go before 70 yards to go. He's got 1 minute and 22 seconds. What do you think happens there? Do you think Drake Maye gets it done? You're going to bet against him? So I think when it comes down to it, I'm gonna bet on the team that has the freaks, and I'm going to bet on the team that has the first round quarterback to get it done in the fourth quarter in a very competitive football game. And I think this is going to be a fun one. So I'm going to go with North Carolina winning 31-28 in this game.
Interesting stuff. I hope it's not as close as y'all think it is. It's there's going to be a lot of people with turkey gravy oozing through their veins on Saturday, and they don't need cardiac pack and cardiac football games going on. Yeah, I think Hampton has a big day. The reason I think North Carolina wins this game, yes, they're beat up from playing Duke and Clemson, but they had their way with Duke and Clemson's defenses. Granted, the turnovers against Clemson mitigated the scoreboard on that. I think North Carolina can have some success against NC State. I think last year's game against NC State put a lot on tape for North Carolina to avoid and to be able to handle better than they handled it last year. I think Carolina scores some points. I think it's 35-29 Carolina. But I do think State
that's still a close game, Tommy.
I know.
That's still a one-score game.
I think State will have the ball in their hands with the game on the line rather than the inverse. And
That's
Carter
a scarier proposition, Tommy.
Absolutely insane. Hey, they're either going to get it done or not. As Steve Williams said earlier, culture versus culture. Toughness will prevail. We'll see what happens at 8:00. Shout out to
my mother.
Birdie.
My mother, by the way, keeps calling me and insisting that North Carolina has a deal with some cardiac surgeons or whatever around the triangle.
Well, the hospital is right there by the stadium.
It's did they get an NIL deal with a cardiac outfit there?
It is. It's been that kind of year, but like we said, they got to win this game, or I do not want to see the inferno that will result around these parts. Shout out to Gertie. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt. Shout out to Greg and Jason. Hope everybody has a happy and safe Thanksgiving. If you're traveling, be safe. Get where you're going, even if it takes a little bit longer, and eat up. And we'll talk to you on Inside Carolina Live Saturday ahead of North Carolina State. Thanks, boys.